Good morning. I'm Blake Washington, Director of the Division of Budget. On behalf of Governor Hochul, I want to welcome everyone here to these formal budget hearings in advance of fiscal year 27 executive budget, including agency and capital budgets. These hearings today are intended to give us some insight as we prepare the executive budget while setting a framework and a transparent dialogue as we did last week with Quick Start to help us to deliver results for New Yorkers. Under the governor's leadership, the 27 budget will ensure that there's fundamental services and programs that we all care about are preserved while we maintain our strong fiscal foundation. So consistent with the state constitution, the state finance law, we've asked a couple of state agencies to join us here today to talk about their budgets. But before we turn it over, just introduce the folks with me today. I have Matt Howard, Deputy Budget Director, Pat Ryan, Chief Budget Examiner for our agency, our Economic Development, Environment, and Energy and Agriculture portfolio. And Adrian Spazerski, sorry if I butchered that again, works with Pat Ryan, doing much the same and keeping our team on task and on behalf of the governor. I think we also were joined by another member who's not here, but maybe we can go around the table. We have friends from the legislature that have joined us as well, so perhaps we can start here on my left, announcing who you are.
Sure, thanks for having us down, Blake. I'm Matt Stagman from the Assembly Ways and Means Committee.
My name is James Emenegger, and I'm a budget analyst with the Assembly Ways and Means Committee.
I'm Nicole Gotham. I'm with the Senate Finance Committee.
Malik Dare, Senate Finance Committee.
Brian Barlow, Associate Director, Ways and Means.
Dan Green, Analyst, Ways and Means.
Fantastic. Well, we're happy you're here, and obviously we look forward to your partnership throughout the next year. So to begin today's budget hearings, the formal budget hearings, we have with us today the Department of Agriculture and Markets. We have First Deputy Commissioner Stephen McGrattan here today to walk us through some of the wonderful stuff that Ag and Markets is doing on a day-to-day basis, both seen and unseen. And after First Deputy McGrattan testifies, we'll hear from the Division of Housing and Community Renewal. And after each presentation, hopefully the panelists will receive some questions from us here today. And so with that, I'll just like to turn it over to First Deputy Commissioner McGrattan.
Thank you, Director Washington, and everyone seated around the table for the opportunity to come and present to you today what's been going on at Department of Agriculture and Markets. I'm appearing on behalf of Commissioner Ball this morning. Commissioner Ball is with a delegation of commissioners from state departments of agriculture and NASDA, which is the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, touring the parts of the UK to talk about trade opportunities. Commissioner was part of this delegation a couple of years ago, and they've invited him and some colleagues back to look at further opportunities. So normally Commissioner would be here telling our story, but I get to do that for him today, so I appreciate the opportunity. I want to start off by saying, you know, it seems weird to talk about COVID 6 years later, but my experience in government has been every year's worth of disruption requires 2 or 3 years worth of recovery. So one thing that we saw during COVID was the need for a resilient food supply system. COVID greatly disrupted the food supply system, both for processors, farmers, and markets. We saw that during that time, and the Commissioner has been working very hard with the Governor's office and with you folks to put programs in place in order to protect us from that in the future. So without the funding that we have received through the various programs through the budget process, and without the staff that DOB has allocated to our fill level, we could not have put these programs into place. Sometimes I think, you know, food is kind of taken for granted. We all need it, and it's always fairly available to us, but we saw what happens when it's not right there for us, especially for food insecure people. So when food insecure people don't have access, it becomes twice as hard for them to get an ample supply of food. So First of all, I just wanted to start off and say how appreciative I am and how appreciative Commissioner Ball is of the partnership that we have with the Division of Budget and with the Legislature and with the Governor's Office in putting these critical programs into place. So with that, this slide I'll just kind of show very briefly, but it's shown over since March of 2019, the different programs that have been put in place to help ensure a sufficient food supply and a resilient food supply system. All of these programs required funding and required staff in order to implement. Our current approved fill level for 25-26 state fiscal years, 656 employees. This was up 99 staff from the previous fiscal years. This shows a breakdown by division of all of our of all the divisions within the agency, except for in administration. You'll see that's all of our operational divisions: council, HR, fiscal management, emergency management, all that kind of stuff. So we're at a total of 568 employees to date. We have recruitments out currently for 61 positions. 30 of those alone are for food safety and inspection. We are currently transitioning 12 positions at the state fair from temporary and hourly to permanent, and I'll explain why that's critical in a few minutes. That gives us 641 expected FTEs by the end of the fiscal year. That gives us a buffer of about 15 or so FTEs to work with new initiatives, new programs, new funding. So I'm really happy to report, Commissioner takes the responsibility of fiscal management very seriously. So I thought it was important to show you all that when we asked for 99 employees to our fill level, we were going to use them, and we didn't overshoot by much, and we didn't under ask. So I thought this was important to show you folks. Jump over to food safety and inspection support. This has been something that we have been working on for several years within the department. This division licenses and inspects approximately 37,000 establishments throughout the state, and this is everything from small bodegas down in the city all the way up to very large food processing plants and in those facilities. So we investigate foodborne illness outbreaks, consumer complaints. We follow up on food recalls. So last year we did 22,000 food inspections, which is up considerably from the years before because of the number of staff that we were able to add. Because of our fill level increase, we seized close to 2.5 million pounds of food and did 160, you guys can read these statistics on your own. I won't go through all of them, but suffice it to say, with the 30 additional FTEs, we were able to do an increased number of food safety and inspections throughout the state, making the food supply that we are providing the safest that we can. State fair support. The state fair is not just a 13-day event, it's a 365-day-a-year event facility. And we have really tried very hard to run it as such. It brings those off-fair events, as we call them, bring in a fair amount of revenue. It also provides a facility centrally located in the state for a lot of state agencies to conduct meetings and trainings. It provides a lot of not-for-profit, reasonably priced space to hold events. One of the challenges that we had with FTEs, we had a lot of hourly staff. There was a lot of turnover with hourly staff. There is no permanence to them. They were paid differently than equivalently classified permanent staff. So through the budget, we were able to set aside 50 FTEs for the state fair to transition from temporary hourly employees over to full-time jobs and doing those job duties that they were already doing as hourly positions. I want to talk a little bit about the state fair in the past 5 years. The state fair has transitioned. I want to talk a little bit about it because I know that through the budget we receive a fair amount of spending allocation. And it's important for you all to know how that money is spent. So the state fair has transitioned from an attendance-based metric model to a quality of experience-based model. Attendance is still important to us. Don't get me wrong when I say this. We still strive to attract as many people, visitors to the state fair as we possibly can. But it's also important for us to have the fairgoer have a positive experience, and then also equally as important for our vendors and our concessionaires to have a good experience. And you're going to see some of the results of what I'm talking about in the next slides. So this focus on quality of experience has been paired with a focus on fair and consistent policies that are developed on a yearly basis, reviewed on a yearly basis, and delivered on time so that vendors and our sponsors and our concessionaires know what to expect every year, and it's done on a consistent basis and on time. We could not have done this without staff. To give you an idea, our concession staff 6 years ago was 1.5 FTEs. We've been able to grow that to through the increase in our through the increase in our fill level to 3 FTEs and 1 seasonal employee. And they have gone through all of our concessions policies and procedures and worked with our vendors and concessionaires to achieve policies and procedures that are fair and consistent. This has really been one of the top priorities that the commissioner has asked us to achieve within the agency, as well as a focus on agriculture. The state fair had a focus on a carnival in the past. We've refocused those efforts on increasing the agricultural presence at the state fair, as can be seen through our capital budget with all of the new ag buildings that have been built and will be built in the next couple of years. I'll give you a little anecdotal story. There is a member of Assembly in the Syracuse area who I got to know very well because he had received a lot of complaints from fairgoers and from concessionaires. Last year, he saw the commissioner at the fair and said, "I don't know what's going on at the fair anymore." And the commissioner was a little bit perplexed and said, "Assemblyman, what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I don't get any complaints anymore. How am I going to know what's going on at the fair if I don't get any complaints?" So I thought that was pretty good, and I'll take that as a feather in our cap. The other thing that we've tried to do in the last couple of years under the governor's direction is to tie together county fairs with the state fair. It's great to look at the New York State Fair in and of itself, but what's it look like when you combine it with all the other county fairs? So also through the state budget, we were able to use some funding provided by the legislature to improve the infrastructure at county fairs. We have a really great program that brings youth to different county fairs. We had a bus that came down from Oswego County that brought a bunch of kids down to the state fair this year, all kind of fitting in with the governor's Family First agenda. So let me move on to our other slides. And I won't go through all of these statistics one by one, but as you can see here, there is a general increase in the survey results that we have received this past year. Every year after the state fair, we send out a survey to our vendors and concessionaires and to fairgoers. And those survey results have shown that the overall fair experience has significantly risen to 72%, which is up 10 percentage points from last year, indicating that the policies and procedures and the funding that we have put in place has improved the quality of the event and the fairgoers' experience. 75% reporting that they'll likely return to the fair next year, which is really good. We're really proud of that. State Fair year-round programming support, as I mentioned before, this is a 365-day-a-year event facility. We use that for a number of different events. One of my favorite events that we were able to bring to the fair this past year was the FFA State Annual Convention. The first FAA convention ever was held at the State Fairgrounds this past year, was their 100th anniversary. And so this past year, we were able to bring them back to the fairgrounds. We worked very closely with the FAA student and adult leadership. And it was so successful that we are now negotiating a 3-year contract starting in 2027 for FFA annual convention to come back to the state fair. So I think that's really cool. Shifting focus a bit. Companion animal support provided. So in 2024, there was an amendment to general business law that prohibited the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits from retail pet stores and dealers and brokers. This amendment does allow pet stores to collaborate with incorporated SPCAs, humane societies, and other not-for-profits or adoption services so that these pet stores can then provide space to showcase those not-for-profits, dogs, cats, and rabbits, so that people can come there for adoption. In 2022, the Companion Animal Care Standards Act was passed and signed into law. It requires that animal shelters in New York State meet specific care standards for animals to improve animal care. This change has increased the number of inspections locations for our Division of Animal Industry by nearly 600 locations. Through the budget process a few years ago, you all supported an additional FTEs to help us achieve these, achieve this goal of, well, this requirement to inspect all of these new facilities. We could not have done that with existing staff. Likewise, maybe not likewise, but on the other side of things, these SPCAs and rescue organizations, in order to bring them in compliance with new standards, the enacted budget provided $10 million in capital funds to increase their capacity and to complete capital improvements at these shelters and rescues in order to achieve the new standards by the new law. Overtime tax credit. Thanks, Lisa. I won't go through all of the details of this particular slide, except for to say, to report out that in 2024, I'll back up a little bit. So there's two steps to farms applying for the overtime tax credit. One is they can receive an advance halfway through the year on the overtime that they have paid or plan to pay, and then they file at the end of the year to the Department of Tax and Finance to receive their overall credit. In 2024, the department received 63 advanced credit certificates. We issued those totaling $907,000. Following up at the end of the year, Department of Tax and Finance received 85 payment requests totaling $490,000. So you add those two numbers together, and in 2024, the state paid out approximately $1.4 million in overtime tax credits. This was a brand-new program for the agency. We worked very closely with Department of Tax and Finance and with ITS in order to develop the technology solutions that we needed for folks to apply and for us to review and approve, and to transfer those approved certificates over to Department of Tax and Finance. We needed 4 FTEs to support these efforts, so that was also provided by Division of Budget in the budget a couple of years ago, so we appreciate that. Additional agencies support provided, renewable energy development. We've received additional staff to address increasing transmission and solar projects on farmland statewide. The agency and the commissioner recognize the need to develop alternative energy solutions. That's not a discussion. Sometimes those projects compete with farmland. What we want to make sure that we do is that we are also, while we're developing energy technology, we want to also make sure that we are good stewards of the natural resource that provides the food that we need in order to feed New Yorkers and the rest of the world. So we do that by having staff who review these projects on a regular basis, trying to protect the top 4 tiers of soil in New York State. EV charge inspections. So as part of EO 22, state agencies are expected to install EV chargers statewide. As more and more of these EV chargers are installed in gas stations and parking lots, our Division of Weights and Measures team has established procedures to validate the kilowatt output to the consumer, making sure that the consumer is receiving the kilowatts in their car that the supplier is saying that they're delivering. So we are working on implementing a statewide testing initiative to ensure that consumers are receiving what they're supposed to receive. Another new project and new technology on large bridges, and this is primarily downstate at this time, is Weigh in Motion. This is where technology is put in place as a motion-sensitive weigh station on bridges, so that proper weight limits are complied with by the trucking industry. We work very closely with New York City DOT in order to verify the accuracy of their weigh in motion devices and to recertify them. We do this on an annual basis with New York City DOT, and we're currently in negotiations with the MTA for several of their bridges. Dairy industry support. It seems like every other week we have a press release announcing a new dairy project, which we love since it's our #1 commodity, agricultural commodity in the state. We have seen a $2.8 billion investment in the state in recent years, including a new Fairlife plant, a new Chobani plant, expansions of Cayuga Milk Ingredients, and expansions of Agrimark. The 2025 enacted budget provided $24 million to the first round of the Dairy Modernization Grant Program. In June of '25, the governor announced nearly $21.6 million awarded to 103 dairy farms across the state investing in new technology and new equipment to expand their storage capacity and strengthen operations. An additional $10 million was included in the 25-26 enacted budget. We are expecting that RFP to be put out on the streets in a couple of months or so. Also provided through the budget is funding for industry-applied research and educational programming through Cornell Pro Dairy. This helps increase farm profitability, sustainability, and competitiveness for our dairy farmers. We heard a lot in the past about increasing production in order to meet demand. We have worked very hard about also increasing profitability. So how do we increase profitability for dairy farmers? And then also, how do we make sure that the cows we have are producing the most milk that we can? And that's the job of Cornell, to take that research that they perform and apply that directly to dairy farmers. That increases the output per cow. It's kind of funny to talk about an animal as like a little milk processing facility, but that's kind of what they are. So the better products you put into the cow, the more output you get out of that cow, and the less cows you need to have on a dairy farm in order to achieve that same output of raw milk. So we now provide 16.1 billion pounds of milk in the state every year through our dairy farm, from our dairy farmers. Talked in the opening about food resiliency and supply chains. Couple of things to mention here. We saw food supply be reduced due to COVID. We also then saw the reduction of markets to farms. So how do we as the Department of Agriculture and Markets work for the industry to help them to develop new markets? So through the budget, we have been able to provide $1.5 million to our Farm to School initiative. We have able to use the funding provided through the budget for Farm to School scratch kitchens, $10 million. I remember when I went to school, all the food was made by the cafeteria ladies from scratch. That has shifted to processed foods. When that supply of processed foods, when the distribution of that gets interrupted, you now don't have the processed food going into schools. So we're now reversing that and looking at ways for schools to increase the capacity to start making their own food again. And not maybe just at individual schools, because the school that where my son went with, 1,000 students, doesn't have the capacity to have their own kitchen, but a regional BOCES who puts in scratch cooking equipment can then cook the food for several different schools. So this funding has been really instrumental in regional school food infrastructure initiatives. Fresh Connect program, that's funded out of the EPF at $3.1 million. You're probably all likely familiar with Nourish New York, which was a program directly out of COVID to help primarily dairy farmers who had lost a market for fluid milk, and then to help food insecure people. Meat processing program at $5 million. One of the strengths of New York's agriculture, I think, is its diversity, not just in commodity, but by farm size. We have a lot of small to medium-sized farms and large farms. Most of our meat farms are small and medium-sized facilities. It's very hard for them to get their meat. It was very hard for them to get their meat processed in-state. Most of it had to go out of state to the larger meat processing facilities in Pennsylvania. It was due to lack of infrastructure. So through this grant program, we're able to provide infrastructure to smaller meat processors to then keep that meat processed in-state. And likewise with our food and fiber processing grant program at $10 million, keeping those small and mid-sized food processing businesses competitive. Here's another slide on the food supply chain, and this primarily talks about our seafood grant program, primarily down in Long Island. Through the 24-25 enacted budget, you provided $4 million in grant funding to marine farm infrastructure, including dock space and processing equipment. Their biggest need is providing that cold chain security between the dock and the processing facility. If you all know anything about seafood, you want to keep that cold fresh. Otherwise, it goes bad really fast. So our smaller seafood producers really had trouble with on-boat processing and with cold chain infrastructure. So that funding provided really went a long way into helping increase their profitability and decrease spoilage of their product. Ag education in New York schools. We can have the greatest processing facilities and delivery system in the country, but without a workforce, we can't really do much. The commissioner has believed, has really believed in starting that workforce development down in the schools. Ag in the Classroom, Association of Ag Educators, FFA, 4-H, Manners, they all receive funding through the state budget. This helps them implement programs to introduce young people into agriculture, not just production agriculture either. It goes into the chemistry lab, it goes into the business classes, it goes into the engineering classes. All of those disciplines can provide a workforce to the food system. And this funding is integral into getting young people knowing that if I want to be an engineer, I can go build cars, or I can go to a food processing plant and produce food for people. But without these programs inside the classrooms, these kids don't know of the other opportunities that are available to them outside of the traditional career paths. Let's talk about, we wouldn't be the Department of Agriculture and Markets if we didn't round out with a few good diseases. The main one on our minds for the last couple of years has been highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HIPATH, or HPAI. So last year we had 2 concurrent and overlapping outbreaks of HPAI in poultry and in dairy cattle across the nation. It's been devastating, especially to the poultry and egg markets. In New York State, there have been 28 confirmed poultry flocks in New York State with the outbreak, beginning back in January 2022. These are mostly backyard flocks, but there have been some commercial poultry flocks that were affected. More than 100,000 domestic birds were depopulated in New York due to HIPATH. Live bird markets are integral to the food supply system, primarily in New York City. There are a couple live bird markets upstate in Syracuse. But these markets are proactively screened and inspected. We have 89 of them in the state. Last year, around this time of year when the migratory bird season really kicks into gear, we see outbreaks in the birds coming from the farms in Pennsylvania over into the live bird markets. This disease spreads very fast. It can come from somebody, from a consumer who goes into one bird market and goes into another bird market. So it's really important that our DAI staff are down there in the bird markets and inspecting them and helping the bird markets stay open. The bird markets have been extremely cooperative when we've had to close for cleaning and disinfection and depopulation. And last year, in a couple of different areas, we've proactively have closed them all for a period of a week or two to stomp out the disease and then reopen those bird markets again, keeping their businesses open. So it sounds kind of bad in New York State, but compared to states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, some of the big poultry states down south, we've had it pretty easy, but it does affect our markets. In the dairy industry, the first dairy cattle in the country was detected with HPAI on March 25th, 2024. Since then, we have been working very closely with USDA, FDA, and NASDA to keep the spread of HPAI in dairy cattle out of New York State. Happy to report that through our efforts and through the emergency orders that we have been put in place, New York State has been delisted from the states on the national map, and which tells us that there is no HPAI that we know of in dairy cattle in New York State. So that's a pretty good achievement, I think. And that's the end of my official presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner. To know that those diseases are not in our cattle population is obviously wonderful news, and wonderful news for consumers and for people that that read science fiction and non-science fiction novels, medical thriller novels. I think it's good news in the state of New York that you and the team are the cops on the beat, and we're avoiding the worst of the outcomes that could be possible here. So we appreciate that. Maybe we'll turn over some questions. I'll begin if I can take that privilege. I just was thinking about, you were talking about the state fair, and we know how important it is for us. And I just, for a moment, just want to say thanks to the department for their guidance and their technical assistance and their support for other county fairs that happen throughout the state of New York. I get to go to one, the Little World's Fair in Grahamsville, New York, which I'm very fond of. I've been going to since I was a kiddo. And one thing that's important there that you highlighted is the agricultural mission and making sure that people know how important that is and integral it is for our state's economy and for communities throughout the state. This is their bread and butter. This is a way of life for so many. And so for the department's example, obviously thanking you for that as well, and changing some of the lens in which we view even the state fair through. So I was at the state fair this summer, and I had a great time. It was a dreary day, but I had my daughter with me, and she enjoyed it as well. And as you know, the governor, among all things that she's been talking about, is just affordability for New York's families, and it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. But it's also how people just engage state services and state infrastructure. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about what the department is doing to make sure that the fair itself remains affordable this year, into next year, and into the future, beyond the 25-cent cup of milk, which the governor is committed to make sure that remains in perpetuity. But there's any number of items, too, that consumers would confront when they walk to the state fair. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about what the department is doing to hold that trajectory?
Sure, absolutely. That's a very good question. As I mentioned previously, when the department was charged with increasing attendance without increasing program, we had to come up with price gimmicks. We lowered the price of admission tickets down. We had free days. We had no free days. It created a lot of confusion within fairgoers because I would buy my ticket online at $8, and then I get to 2 months later, and then now there's a big, huge sale on tickets. One thing that we wanted to do, recognizing that it takes a fair amount of money to run the state fair and maintain the facilities, is we wanted to get back on track with a fee increase, parking and admission, without still hurting the consumer. So I'm happy to report that this year we're going to maintain for the third year in a row $8 for an admission ticket, $12 for parking. Kids 12 and under are free, and seniors 65 and plus are free to go to the state fair. To give you a comparison about what a deal that is, Texas State Fair is $15, Minnesota State Fair is $17, Iowa $14, the Big E over in Massachusetts is $15, Arizona State Fair $15. We are even cheaper than 4 county fairs, cheaper than Erie County, Dutchess, Altamont, and Saratoga. So with the funding that's provided, and not just in operational funding, but infrastructure funding, where we can make improvements to the grounds, bringing more off-fair events onto the grounds to help generate income, we're able to keep those ticket prices down, making the state fair one of the most affordable state fairs in the country.
Thank you for that. It's so important, certainly foremost, as I said earlier, to the governor's overall agenda of making these events affordable, but also for vendors inside the fair. You know, if consumers are showing up and walking in, having paid a great deal before they walk in the place, they spend less among the consumers there that are trying to earn a living as well. So it's really important that we continue along that path. You'd mentioned before just on food sourcing, and certainly the one thing that perked up my ears was about school scratch cooking at school, and perhaps on behalf of the children, anything but the pizza. You know, I know when I was a youngster, the frozen pizza was very important to me, and it had and perhaps I know that didn't come from scratch, but it was that Friday was like manna from heaven. But we know that the federal government's made it a little bit more difficult for our local school districts to source locally produced foods, and I know that Ag and Markets has been doing a lot to do that, so to help bridge the gap. So can you maybe walk through a little bit some of the strategies that the department is using to facilitate engagement with local schools and farmers and locally sourced foodstuffs throughout the state?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. So the department has a division of agricultural development. They have a whole team dedicated to farm-to-school initiatives. We work very closely with Cornell Cooperative Extension and a team that they have, where we go out into the schools and help them source New York State food. So we have the 30% initiative that provides extra funding to those schools who achieve a purchasing rate of 30% or more of New York State products. And we work very closely with the State Education Department in those reimbursements. So the job of Ag and Markets team is to work, first of all, with farms and distributors to source all of that New York State food, and then put them together with the schools who are looking to achieve their 30% purchasing goals of New York State products, so that schools know where to find the food. If any of you have ever talked to Commissioner Ball for more than maybe 45 seconds, you'll know one of his biggest mantras is connect the dots. So we work very hard at connecting those dots between schools who are looking to, one, provide nutritious, locally grown and processed food, to those who are producing it. So our job is to facilitate that, and then through the state budget process, to to develop the programs and then implement those programs, and then provide the funding for them to build the infrastructure so that they can provide food to their students.
Thank you. Obviously, it's you don't need me to tell you, it's a win-win for everybody to make sure that our communities and schools are thriving as well at once. So, and obviously making our kiddos more healthy along the way with fresh and not processed food. So, thank you for that. So, the panel, Matt.
Thank you for your time today, and you definitely provided a comprehensive view of all the activities that the department engages in on behalf of New Yorkers, so we all appreciate that. One of the points that you had made was the sort of significant investments that are, underway in the dairy industry across upstate, be it Chobani or Fairlife or, Cayuga Milk. These are huge signature investments that not only are going to sort of promote economic activity and support jobs in the local areas, they're new markets for, dairy producers across the state. I guess the one question that I had when I sort of saw what you had presented was, what's the scale of the impact that, the dairy farmers are going to see as a result of these investments in terms of the demand in new markets for their product? You mentioned that it's the largest commodity that New York produces. I would think that, the scale of these investments are really probably unlike anything, you've seen in recent history. And I would bet that they're going to have a dramatic impact on, what it means for sort of the producers across the state. Is there any sense that you have of what scale the impact might be, for those producers across the state?
So that's a very good question. So the impact is the addition of several billions of pounds of milk needed in order to meet the demand from these new dairy processors, which I can get you that. Let me put those together for you and give you a consolidated number of the impact in pounds. Mm-hmm. The challenge is that it creates a couple of different challenges, though, for dairy farmers. One of which I talked a little bit about, and that's the increase in productivity of the cows on the farm. That's all achieved through the different research programs through Cornell and through ProDairy. The other challenge that they have is infrastructure on the farm. As the size of the dairy processors increase, so increases the demand on the trucking industry to get milk from the farm to the dairy plant. When dairy farmers are sizing their operations for smaller production, they have smaller on-farm storage capacity. That results in having the milk cooperatives and trucking companies having to come to the farm more often. That does a lot of things. Number one, increases your carbon footprint quite a bit. It increases the number of times that milk is transferred. So one of the things that the Dairy Modernization Program was able to do was build storage capacity on the farm. Milk's got to be stored someplace. So it either gets stored on the farm and then goes to the processing plant and then gets used, or it doesn't get stored on the farm and goes straight to the processing plant and then gets stored there until it's used in the production. Increasing that storage capacity on the farm is really, we heard from the dairy industry, and they told us they will be able to increase production and profitability with on-farm storage. So a couple of years ago, the commissioner put together, he called it the Dairy Think Tank. And really it was a number of farmers and a number of processors and a number of dairy industry people who got together and still get together and sit around and talk about the challenges of the dairy industry. And this was really the Dairy Modernization Program was an idea that came out of that grassroots discussion. I hope that answered your question.
Definitely.
Nice. So I started on this side of the room where we began. So to my colleagues on the right, do you have any questions for the Deputy Commissioner?
I'd like to go back to what you said about meat processing capacity and the expansion grants that you talked about. Is there anything you could give us that would give us a bit of a picture about things like if there are any new processing plants going in, where are they located, and how are they doing? How is that program actually affecting the expansion of meat processing capacity in the state as we speak?
So that's a good question. We're just in the beginning stages of issuing the RFPs for those grant proposals. What I can do is let me get back to the office and find out the status of that and get you the number of applications we received, the amount of funding awarded, and, we can give you some anecdotal information from the applications as to what they talk about increase in processing capacity.
Thank you. That's just been one of the most consistent, in the last several months, I've gone out on several farm tours, and that has been one of the most consistent areas of concern that has been expressed to me from farmers who are affected by that.
The meat processing system is one of the most complicated things that I ever seen before. I'm not an agricultural economist, but you have these really large packing houses in Pennsylvania. What they can do, what they have done before in the past, is when a processing plant opens up in New York State, they offer that beef producer 2 cents more a pound. And they can do that because they have the cash flow. They keep that up until a point where the new processing plant is no longer processing meat. A plant does no good if meat's not moving through it to be processed. Within 2 years' time, they can put a new processor out of business. And then they go back to the same price that they had before with the beef producer or the meat producer. So the thinking has really changed in the last several years of not building new big meat processors, but building smaller processors that are keeping meat in state so that you're not competing with big packing houses. If they don't see you as a threat and competition, they're not going to outprice you and put you out of business. So what we've been able to do is, several years ago, we, through the budget process, provided funding to Cornell to put on their staff a couple of folks who know the meat processing business, and they've been able to advise us on coming up with these grant programs that will provide funding to facilities that will not try to compete with the big meat processors and therefore increase the meat processing capacity in the state. But we can get you some more information.
Thanks.
Pat Reed, can you jump in? You good? My colleagues on the left-hand side here?
Sure.
Thank you very much, that was great. You mentioned the solar on farms. I was wondering about agrivoltaics. I think they've been looking at it for a couple of years. I think a couple of years ago, people didn't think it was like a scalable type of thing. I'm wondering if that's changing or if there's any.
I don't think it's changing. I think we're still looking at it very closely. As you know, there has been some funding provided to the agency, to Cornell through the state budget, for them to research agrivoltaics, figure out what's going to work best practices for farmers. I think we're still in the information gathering stage, the research stage. As Commissioner always challenges us to do, let's find a way forward, and let's put things together and make things work. I think that's a little bit ways off, but we're working towards that. I know the Commissioner talks to his counterpart at NYSERDA all the time about it. How are we doing on agrivoltaics? What can we do differently? So we're still working towards that.
Thank you.
I just had 2 quick questions. Going back to the state fair, do you know what the economic impact is for the state and revenue that the state fair generates?
Economic impact of the state fair, that's a very good question. We just did we just received some funding through a national fair organization to take a look at that. It's just being finalized now, so as soon as we get the results of that, I can share that. But that is something that we are starting to take a look at.
Perfect. And you covered a lot of staffing needs that we did in previous budgets. What's the biggest staffing need now for the department?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The biggest staffing need now going forward after the last previous years we filled, whether it's state fair staff or food inspection, what's the biggest need for the department in upcoming years?
Do we have, I'm
What are
still,
our staffing needs?
staffing
Do we
needs?
have any? Yeah.
I think we're pretty good with staff. I think with the increase in the fill level that we received in the budget last year, and how we've allocated that throughout the agency, and with the division of the state fair, I think we're really in a pretty good spot. I think we have a decent cushion in our fill level that's been provided, and 6 years ago, I was a little nervous, probably more than a little nervous, probably kind of scared, but we're pretty comfortable now.
Thank you.
Any other colleagues have any other further questions for the Deputy Commissioner? Seeing as there are none, Deputy Commissioner, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your insight with us. I know that if the teams have any additional questions, we'll reach out. Certainly use us. We can use, or go right to the agency. But we look forward to a continued partnership with you and the Commissioner. Thanks for all you do. And so that concludes this portion of the hearing. We're going to break for about 5 minutes to allow for the next presenter to come in. But thanks again. Take care.
Thanks very much for your time.
So welcome back, everyone, for our second item on today's agenda, our capital budget presentation. With us today is from the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal is Commissioner Ruth Ann Wisnauskas. We're eagerly waiting your report. We know that the division has done so much great work in the last handful of years in housing production and guidance, and just as a point of personal privilege, walking through budget, having you advise the governor, advise our staff in real time, often at crazy times of the day. We appreciate it, and your sober and sound advice has always been really valuable throughout the process. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. Commissioner?
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here today to present on Homes and Community Renewal's capital budget. And I have some PowerPoint slides and a lot of pretty pictures. To remind folks, our mission at the agency is to build, preserve, and protect affordable housing and to increase homeownership opportunities throughout New York State. We do this sort of as an umbrella agency. While I'm going to talk mostly about capital today, just sort of a way of reminder that underneath the umbrella of HCR is Sunny Mae, the State of New York Mortgage Agency, which focuses on financing mortgages for first-time home buyers across the state. Our HFA, which issues bonds for production of multifamily housing, HTFC, AHC, DHCR. We are at no loss for acronyms for the many programs and offices within the agency, but we have a very wide, very broad wingspan across housing in the state, and I'll get into some of that in the course of my presentation. For the most part, from a capital perspective, we are rooted in what is a 5-year statewide housing plan. This was enacted in fiscal 2023. It is an overall $25 billion plan supported by state capital that we have been spending since fiscal 2023 and will finish up in next fiscal year with the goal of creating and preserving 100,000 affordable homes, and within that, 10,000 of those with supportive services. And we're on track. So we are at nearly 70,000 units created or preserved. And our housing has come sort of in every size and shape and flavor. So we are building in rural areas, in urban areas, and suburban areas. We are building single-family homes, multifamily buildings, rental housing, homeownership. We are doing new construction. We are doing preservation. We are really sort of run the gamut of types of housing. And sort of one of the great things I think about our work is that as you travel the state, if you travel the state, you will see our signs in so many communities across the state on all different types of housing, as well as other sort of larger sort of community investments. And I'll talk a little bit about those as well. We also try to make our work transparent. So we created a housing plan dashboard a couple of years ago, and you can go on our website, hdr.noi.gov, and there are dots for the work that we've done in this housing plan where you can look at project level detail that would show you what region it's in, what political district, details about the projects themselves. And so a way to sort of show off our work, and for people who are curious if we are working or not working in certain areas of the state, you can see that, and you can see the types of projects that we're financing. Sort of a great tool that we added. So I'm going to talk today mostly about our capital spend. And we do spend kind of in three big primary categories: on new construction of housing, on preservation, and then we sort of call out home ownership because it sort of distinguishes itself, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So some of our new construction capital programs, but I won't go through all of them, but just to highlight a few, are multifamily new construction. We have $1 billion over 5 years. Our supportive housing program, so this is housing for vulnerable populations that come with service dollars. Senior housing, middle income housing. We recently launched and support an accessory dwelling unit program in communities across the state. So multifamily new construction. So this is a $1 billion program. We are, for the most part, funding new construction, but also adaptive reuse. So lots of times you'll see old schools or office buildings or hotels or dorms that, because they're sort of changing use, we also put in the bucket of new construction. They are advancing housing priorities of ours across the state, often very focused on revitalizing communities, building housing in well-resourced areas, so places that are close to jobs, close to transit, and making sure that our projects are sort of meeting those statewide goals. So I will go through a series of those to explain a little more about sort of what our projects look like. We are also often supporting other state programmatic goals through both the REDC or the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, DRI. Lots of communities are putting housing projects into those applications, and so we are often co-funding along and supporting that overall statewide effort. So starting in Mount Vernon today, this is a 315-unit project that's in construction in the city of Mount Vernon. It's mixed use, as many of our projects are, so it'll have a community facility and it will have ground floor retail space, providing an amenity not only to the people who get to live in the building, but also to the larger community. It was overall a $223 million total development cost. So I have the development costs on most of these slides, mostly just to sort of remind and ground folks that these are very large investments in these communities. This project itself had about a $40 million state capital subsidy into it, but that leverages lots of other sources that go into these projects to make them happen. As I had said before, these are often supporting other goals. In this case, this is located near the Mount Vernon West Metro North Station, so we are very focused on making sure that we are building housing close to transit, especially in the lower part of the state where communities can be very transit-rich. Coming up a little closer here to Saratoga Springs, which for anyone who spends some time there know there's an enormous amount of housing pressure because a lot of people want to be in Saratoga and in Saratoga Springs. There's a lot of jobs, but there is not enough housing for everybody to meet the economic base there. So this is a great project that was just completed this summer, 202 affordable and supportive housing apartments. It's about a mile from the downtown center. It was previously unused space, so also often we are building in underutilized or sort of not utilized land, but that is adjacent to that is adjacent to downtowns. In this case, it was 12 multifamily buildings and 4 townhouses, and they were designed to complement the existing neighborhood. And this was a development that was facilitated by a rezoning that happened in Saratoga that was designed to promote housing growth, and I'll talk about a little later in my presentation, but we are very focused on encouraging communities to look at their zoning to allow more housing, whatever type of housing sort of works for that community. And so this is an example of a project that helps support and respond to a community that was looking for more housing growth. This is a $78 million total development cost, and it had about $19 million of state capital. Going over to Long Island, this is a project called Carmen Place in Hempstead that is under construction. This is also transit-oriented, right by the train station in Hempstead, 228 units. This is the first building of a very large redevelopment area in Hempstead Village that's over 200 acres, and there are multiple projects that are happening, but many of them are market rate, and here we are able to provide 100% affordable housing in a place that very much needs housing for the workforce in Long Island. This is $155 million total development cost. It had about $23 million of state capital in it. And overall in Hempstead Village, they are really trying to grow their restaurants and their sort of downtown plaza and their artist lofts, and they had gotten a $10 million DRI award, and so this housing complements sort of their overall efforts for their economic growth goals for that region. Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit to another big focus of ours, which is supportive housing. Their state has had a long-term commitment to creating supportive housing in New York State. We work at HCR very closely with the O agencies, so with OTDA and OMH and OASAS, who provide, through the budget, operating contracts to agencies that pay for both services and rent to support the people who live in these supportive housing buildings. We at HCR have a $1.5 billion capital commitment that goes hand in hand with those operating contracts. Over 5 years, as I'd said at the top, we're looking to create 10,000 new units of supportive housing over the 5-year period. And this is obviously promoting stability for individuals and families who are facing homelessness, who have mental health challenges, who have substance use disorder, who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Really the gamut of services that the state agencies are serving as well. These buildings have on-site services, so they often have social workers or case managers, people connecting individuals and families to benefits, to jobs, to healthcare, making sure that as people land in these buildings, if they're coming out of a shelter or a state institution, that they can live stably in this environment and become successful. And it's a wonderful model that we've been doing for a long time. In addition to the great outcomes for the individuals who live in these buildings, reducing reliance on shelters, on emergency rooms, obviously helps overall on the budget and helps sort of community stability and safety. So it's a very sort of valuable and sort of a bang for the buck kind of investment to make sure that people are coming out of shelters and can be stably housed with rich level of services. So I'll talk about some of our supportive housing projects. We recently completed this year one in Schenectady called Mosaic Apartments. In this particular building, half of the apartments are reserved for individuals and families who have had experienced homelessness and need supportive services. These tenants will get case management services, healthcare, transportation services, independent living skills, education. This project is also part of the city of Schenectady's overall planning and revitalization efforts. So again, we're trying to support communities that are looking to grow their housing stock and doing that in sort of a thoughtful way, and then bringing in projects like ours to help them fulfill their goals. This is going back down to the Bronx, a project that was also recently completed. This is a 2-phase project called Star Hill. The first phase is 326 units. This includes apartments for formerly homeless as well as substance OASAS clients who have substance use disorder. It's a 14-story building. It has an enormous amount of amenities. This was originally a residential treatment center, so it was also kind of an underutilized site, although it did have a building on it, and this smaller building was taken down. And this area was part of a larger rezoning area that New York City undertook that allowed sort of the scale of this building to get built. It's in New York City, so it is transit-oriented, I think, sort of generally, but also it's near bus lines and train lines, so it's very much supporting also our TOD efforts in the city. This is, as I said, sort of a $189 million development that was supported by state capital. Going up into the Bronx, 3663 White Plains, was staying in the Bronx, not going up. 3663 White Plains, also a new construction, 8-story building. This is, I'll talk a little bit about our sustainability goals. This building, like many of ours, is also all electric. So we have been, since the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act was passed, we have been working to reduce the sort of carbon footprint of the buildings that we finance. Buildings have sort of the largest carbon footprint in the state, and so we have switched our buildings to all electric. So it's not listed here sort of in the bullets, but these buildings are also helping to contribute to our overall statewide goals to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. This project is also very close to transit, also has on-site supportive services, including behavioral health services and employment and vocational support. So shifting out of our new construction and new construction of supportive housing, I'll talk a little bit about our preservation capital program. So I'll touch a little bit on our multifamily preservation, Mitchell-Lama, and our public housing programs, all of which you can see here have 5-year spend dollars in the hundreds of millions. So the Mitchell-Lama program, something that is talked about a lot as a real long-time program that had provided historically a lot of housing across the state, created in 1955. These are buildings that are rental and co-op. There are over 130 of them across the state. Oh, you can't see the bottom of that slide either. Sorry about that. We have about $120 million in the budget to recapitalize and invest in Mitchell-Lamas across the state. We oversee for ourselves about 95 rental Mitchell-Lamas and 37 co-ops. These are privately owned and privately managed buildings, but we have regulatory oversight over them. They are an old stock. They're primarily built over in the 50s and 60s and are in need of a lot of capital investment, and so we work with both the co-op sort of housing companies as well as owners of these buildings to make sure that they are upgrading elevators, boilers, all sorts of mechanicals, also kitchens and baths as needed, or complying with other local law like facade inspections and facade repairs and things like that. So we do a fair amount of work every year in keeping this very critical housing stock upgraded and invested in. Here's an example up in Rochester. I think sometimes people think Mitchell-Lamas are only downstate, but in fact they're all over. Los Flamboyanes has a 153-unit rental building that we preserved recently. I was just going to talk about some of the upgrades. It was supported by $32 million in direct capital subsidy. And we increased security, which is certainly something that a lot of the older Mitchell-Lamas are looking for because they weren't sort of originally built with those, to make sure that they can have better eyes on who's coming in and out of the buildings. And this was a focus for this campus in particular. Another project which we closed recently and is in construction, this is a co-op building. It's 385 units. This was originally constructed in 1964. It's a 25-story building, and it needed new roofs. It needed asbestos abatement. It needed replacements of boilers and its piping, new windows, new balconies. Oftentimes in large Mitchell-Lama buildings like this that have balconies, there's a lot of need to invest in those and make sure that they can stay safe and don't leak. And we also have an eye in these buildings when we're doing these capital investments to make sure that they are improving their energy efficiency. So since these buildings are old, they really benefit from investments into different types of water and heating and cooling energy efficiency measures, which then help take their operating costs down. It is expensive to operate rental and co-op housing in the state everywhere, and expenses go up every year. And so to the extent that we can provide capital investments that allow these buildings to take down their expenses, that's very much a goal of ours. Shifting a little bit to public housing, there are about 20,000 units of public housing across the state outside of New York City. Obviously, in New York City, there's 180,000 or so New York City Public Housing Authority units run by NYCHA. And so we are very focused on the rest of state housing authorities. Over the course of the last decade, we have invested in 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 of those units just in this housing plan. We've invested in over 1,600 units. We are doing both rehabilitation of the units and sort of preservation and investment, but also a lot of housing authorities are looking to do demo and new construction because these are often very old buildings. They might not always have the right layout to serve the current, sort of tenants or population they're looking to. So we work with housing authorities. It's really sort of their choice, and as they're working with HUD and their local communities, sort of what the right path is for them, and we are there as their partners to help coordinate how best to make those capital improvements and ensure long-term affordability for the stock. For anyone who has been up in Buffalo, it's hard not to say go Bills. We did we're in the midst of a very large project at Perry Homes. Perry Homes was a project that had a lot of parts of the campus were demolished. There was a lot of vacancies. It was very depressed looking. And recently we just completed the first phase, which was a total demo and new construction of very lovely new buildings. It was 405 units. This is a multi-phase project for us. There's over 18 acres on the current site. So here we did 27 buildings to create the 405 new homes. And these projects are covered by a Section 8 project-based housing contract with HUD that will continue to help support and make the buildings affordable for the residents who live in them. So we're very proud of this one, which just finished, and we'll be working on the next phase of this one soon. Close to home here, for anybody who drives on the highway, you might recognize this building. This is Steamboat Square. This was about also a multi-phase project. This preserved 51 existing apartments and also added some new apartments. It also added supportive services to a public housing campus that was in need of those. So we were happy to sort of make that match. Again, doing sort of more modern, sustainable, all electric. Here they were able to do geothermal, which is great at reducing costs for the residents. This is one of the 4 high-rise buildings in this historic Steamboat Square area. And the first one to be renovated, and there are more to come. Almus Oliver Towers, we call it AOTs, in Syracuse. We are very active in Syracuse with the Syracuse Housing Authority, who is undergoing a very large demolition and new construction of their public housing campus. This is a building that was not demolished. That is an existing senior building serving ages 55 and older. That we, prior to starting the demolition and new construction of the campus on the other side of 81, this was a preservation of this existing building, upgraded the common areas, the kitchens, the bathrooms, the facades, a new roof, and created an outdoor seating area and pavilion for the seniors who live at the building, which was a nice addition to this overall campus. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about our homeownership capital programs. We do run through the State of New York Mortgage Agency. We issue bonds to facilitate mortgages for first-time home buyers, but that's not a capital program of ours. So in addition to that work, we also, in a world where it can be hard to find an affordable home, are focused on sort of the supply side of affordable home ownership. We had sort of traditionally been a rental agency because the federal assistance that we get is funds rental housing, but in this housing plan, we scaled up and added $400 million to creating new affordable homeownership supply, which we're really excited about, and I'll talk through some examples of that in addition to some of our work in manufactured home parks. So we call it AHOP, the Affordable Homeownership Program, funds the new construction of both single-family homeownership opportunities as well as condos and co-ops across the state. Again, we had been sort of for 30 years providing mortgages to first-time home buyers, but not everybody could actually find a home to buy with that mortgage. So we shifted our focus to make sure that we could increase the availability of homeownership opportunities. We're about 1,000 units in already and are looking forward to continuing this work across the state. While we do some condos and co-ops, which I think I have a picture of a little later, we also do single-family home development. This was a project that was just completed earlier this year, and the governor went and visited and gave the keys to the home buyer of this house. And so we were really, these obviously are tremendously emotional experiences for people who get to buy, for the most part, sort of their first home. And it's something they can afford in a neighborhood where they want to live. So we're really excited to be in this space and doing this work and are looking to do more and more. This was another project that we did with the Greater Rochester Housing Partnership. So there are nonprofits around the state who have been focused on working with land banks, working in communities where there had been a lot of demolition of single-family homes that were taken by municipalities for tax foreclosure or other reasons. And so really going in and being able to fill in missing teeth in communities with houses like this has been a focus of ours, and I think something that's been very successful to help revitalize a lot of localities across the state. This is just an example of a multifamily homeownership building we did. So this in the Bronx is a project when it's done that will be 58 co-op units over 2 different buildings, affordable to households at 80 AMI, which 80% of the area median income. And here we just sort of noted the average sales price of $230,000. But if you read it all about sort of home sale prices, certainly in New York City, being able to access home ownership at $230,000 is, a third or more less than what you'd be able to find on the market. And here it's in a brand new building, washers and dryers, bike rooms, brand new high quality, affordable home ownership opportunity. We also have 17 other programs that we run. So I sort of went through some of the kind of the bigger capital things that you'll see, but we also run, and you would see in our capital budget, programs like Access to Home and Access to Home for Heroes, which are helping existing low-income homeowners stay in their homes. People oftentimes need ramps in the front of their homes to be able to stay in them. So being able to work with nonprofits and localities around the state to deploy funding. AHC is a program that has historically been run by the agency for a long time, also providing investments into existing homeowners and new homeowners' houses. Our Main Street program, which I'll talk a little bit about on a separate slide, and also our manufactured home replacement. We have a series of programs that both help replace old manufactured homes, which if you drive into any sort of suburban and rural community around the state, you see a lot of manufactured home parks, and you would look at a lot of the manufactured homes and think that they needed to be updated. And so we have been at work for that for quite some time, both individual manufactured home replacement and also working in larger parks to make sure the housing stock gets upgraded, and also that their streets and electrical and oftentimes septic systems can get upgraded so that they can be brought up to code. And so we have a lot of programs that, from our perspective, are tailored to meet what is a very diverse state in terms of its housing needs. So the Main Street program, this is a program that's been around for a long time and people love it. It strengthens sort of traditional downtown main streets by providing funding both for sort of facade reservations at the street level, but also upgrades if there are apartments on the second floor or space on the second floor that hasn't been used as an apartment or that has been sort of dilapidated, making sure we're looking at mixed-use neighborhoods and historic downtowns to sort of reinvigorate and invest in those types of localities. And we also have some new programs. We launched just this year, coming out of last year's budget, what's called our Housing Acceleration Fund. This is a $100 million that we got in the budget. It was $50 million in New York City and $50 million in the rest of state. And we went out and sought partners who matched us dollar for dollar. So we took the $100 million in capital that we got in the budget and scaled that up to with another $115 million that got matched by participating lenders. And the program here is to accelerate construction of mixed income buildings. So we sort of are working on the premise that there are shovel-ready projects across the state, especially in places where there is a lot of job growth, like in the Syracuse area, but also in other places. And we want to make sure that in a time of high construction costs, uncertainty around tariffs, high interest rates, to provide a construction source that drives down that cost for mixed income projects. So we will deploy this money in calendar 2026 because we just sort of started all our partnerships and we should see the projects start to close. But this is sort of an example of us sort of responding to what we saw as a need in the housing market. Another new program which we launched is called Move in New York. This is funding for factory-built homes. So you can see the house in the picture behind. We did a pilot in Syracuse, Schenectady, and in Newcomb in the North Country to site 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family homes. And we cited these for about $250,000 all in, which is about half what it has typically cost us to build a housing unit most anywhere in the state. And even perhaps as important or more importantly, we did it in about a third of the time. So factory-built homes have a very short production timeline, and they get fully built and inspected in the factory and then sited in the community. I think these houses are also taking away a lot of the stigma of what people typically think of in factory-built homes. They are very cute. It has a porch and it has a driveway and a detached garage, and they're built to a very high quality. And we're really excited to scale this from what was a 3-community pilot, and now we're going to go to a 200-unit sort of full-blown program with 10 or 15 communities across the state. So we're in the process of bringing in the communities now who will order and be able to get these homes sited through the course of next year. And lastly, sort of programmatically, I'll sort of land on pro-housing communities. So the governor's been very focused on working with communities across the state who want to grow their housing supply. Launched in 2023, the $650 million in discretionary funding in the budget that supports localities is now specifically dedicated to pro-housing communities. We at HCR are certifying those communities. They apply to us. We have a series of materials they need to give us, including their zoning, their housing permits, and some other data, which we then put on a website in order to create a sort of transparent view of housing production in the state. Last year, the budget included an additional $100 million for pro-housing communities targeted specifically towards infrastructure needs, as well as $5 million in technical assistance, because we heard from traveling around the state that a lot of communities don't have staff who can do the work to increase their housing supply, like look at available municipally owned land or look at their zoning code or even digitize their zoning maps. So the $5 million will go out as grant dollars to localities to help them take measures that they need to either become sort of further their efforts in the pro-housing community program. So we're really excited about that. We have over 380 communities that have been certified to date, and there's a couple hundred more behind them in the process towards certification. And lastly, I would just say, I know that's sort of an overview of what are kind of our biggest capital programs and some of our smaller ones. We try to have a very holistic approach to housing across the state because all communities have different needs, and we want to be able to meet them where they are, whether that is creating new housing, preserving existing housing, working with historic structures, providing support to people who need to live independently in the communities that they're in, whether they're coming out of a shelter or some other institutional living, Also seniors, right? A lot of seniors who need to downsize, and there aren't housing opportunities for them to get out of a house that a small family might otherwise, or a big family might otherwise move into, and making sure there's both senior housing and senior housing with supports as needed in communities that need it. And as I said, providing opportunities for people to buy a home and become a homeowner here in the state of New York. So with that, I will pause and open for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Lots of good work going on throughout the state, and it's nice that you had an opportunity to highlight that, because the housing crisis is a statewide issue, regardless of where we are. It's something that, with the steady hands such as yours on the tiller here, it's helpful. It's really wonderful to know that we're doing the work and promoting it in every corner of the state. We were in a prior meeting today, and we talked about just affordability generally. And there's lots of ways that we promote affordability in housing. There's governmental interventions, of course, but then there's also just increasing supply. And on the last slide, or last couple slides, you talked about the Governor's Pro-Housing Communities Supply Fund. And I think you maybe undersold the amount of work that the department and you yourself have done to engage communities to participate in the program, to generate housing in their backyards, but also of the size and the type that they want locally, whatever their local choice is, promoting the program so that they engage in it. What can you maybe tell our friends here the level of work and engagement that the department and yourself, although I know you'll never tout yourself here, but what has the department done to just spread the word of pro-housing communities throughout the state of New York?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as an agency, we had been very focused on our specific production work for so long, and at the governor's direction a couple of years ago have really expanded our work into not just focusing on the housing that we finance ourselves, but really what housing is getting built in every community across the state. And that led us to really an enormous number of conversations with communities in Long Island, in Westchester, in New York City, in the North Country, in Syracuse, in Buffalo, in Binghamton, the Southern Tier, to really understand more dynamics about what people and what communities wanted and needed. So the sort of outgrowth of that, when we created the Pro-Housing Communities team, we spent an enormous amount of time explaining to people what the program is, explaining how to access funding, whether it's the $650 million or the additional $100 million from last year, that communities need to be able to create more housing. There has been a lot of conversation about zoning, and I think zoning is really important, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. And so communities really need to understand that they do need to look at their zoning maps and look at their permits and look at data and figure out, are their communities growing? There has been, we've heard a lot of communities talk about concern for their schools and having too many kids in their schools. And then, in fact, when we sort of look at their data and we say, well, actually, you don't have that much growing enrollment. Let's talk about what the real challenges are here and what are people concerned about when we talk about housing. Is it traffic? Is it schools? Or is it that we just need to talk a little bit more about what sort of housing is and who needs to live here? And every community that I go to, somebody says that their child wants to come back and live there, but they can't find anywhere to live, or that they would love to downsize to like an apartment, an older couple who wants to downsize to an apartment because they don't really want to take care of a big house anymore or pay a big heating bill, but that doesn't exist in the town, and they want to stay in their town. And so we've really spent a lot of time talking to communities about what about the challenges and the concerns that they have, but also how do we get to some solutions that fit their community, and whether that can be townhouses, it can be single-family homes. It is not always a multifamily rental building in every community. And so making sure that we have programs that can provide what it is that they need based on a community. So we think it's been successful. We have really, loved being actually out on the road and talking to communities about what their housing needs are, and then to be able to think and come back year over year and work with the governor's office on what resources are needed to make that happen.
So much. Just because I neglected to do so before, I should have said that I have Matt Howard with me, Jesse Olzak from the Division of Budget. We have our colleagues here as well, and I want to open up the floor to them. So if you'd like to ask a question of the Commissioner, please do, but please start by saying your name. So Isabel, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. Isabel Underwood, I'm with the Assembly Minority Ways and Means Committee. I just wanted to ask you about City of Yes and the $1 billion appropriation. Has any of that been sort of decided on or, allocated to New York City, and for what purposes?
We have been working with the city and on sort of their goals for the use of those funds. I don't think to date any of it has actually been spent yet, as much as it's just been sort of discussed about what the needs are. Obviously, with the transition in the administration, I suspect we'll be rehaving that conversation come next year. But we are looking to work in partnership with them on the way that supports their housing goals.
There'll be changes that will have to come with that new administration? And do you have had any discussions with that so far?
No, we haven't met with anyone from the incoming administration. I've been working in housing a long time, and so I think, and as I'm sure many of you are aware, as sort of administrations change, while there's a lot of new faces, the underlying work often stays the same, and sort of at its core, I think the city will continue to be focused on producing new and preserving the existing affordable housing, and we're delighted to continue to work with them on that.
Great. And then just my last question, we just were curious about the Resilient and Ready program and just how much funding has been dispersed from those appropriations from the last two budgets, and if you could just sort of describe what areas of the states have really been utilizing those funds.
Yeah, I'd have to follow up with on sort of the exact where we are on the spending. We were really excited to get this funding and be able to work on both having the ability in the wake of storms to be able to work with impacted communities, but even more so, right, to do the proactive side of this that is so focused on and be able to get localities and nonprofits to work with homeowners to put flood vents in or to elevate their mechanicals. And so we have a pretty broad distribution. I could follow up with you on sort of grant and where we are with the grantees, but we want to make sure that we're getting to places that both have been impacted, and obviously it's a little hard these days to know where the next storm is going to be because we've had them in places that we hadn't traditionally had them before. So we will focus on places that have certainly had repetitive impact, but also make sure that we are touching places that also identify themselves as in need of the type of investment. But we can follow up on exact dollars.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Perhaps we'll start on this side of the table. Malik, you want to take it away?
Finance, thank you for the PowerPoint, very insightful. I would just ask, with session and budget approaching, what would the department's biggest capital ask be for this year?
I would think that one of the things that I didn't sort of touch on, but that will become a focus for us next year, is that we had a change in the federal code around the way we can use tax-exempt bonds that allows us to issue more bonds for housing. So I think we'll be looking at what we have left in our capital plan, in our 5-year appropriation, to see, making sure we can certainly we would look to spend all the money we have left and then look to see whether we had any additional needs to take advantage of that. But I think it's probably too soon yet to say where we would see sort of our biggest capital needs.
Hi, I'm Kristen D'Souza. I work with Malik on Senate Finance. And I wanted to ask about the Housing Access Voucher Program. So I've been following along with the release of the mini bids. And I believe the intent was for contracts to be executed by the end of the year. So is that still the case?
Yeah, so we are working with local administrators. For our part, for the overall program, we are not administering it in New York City. We're administering it in the rest of the state. And we are working with local administrators to absorb, to bid for and then contract for that work, with our goal of issuing vouchers in the first quarter of next year, which is sort of as the statute provides. And we're sort of on schedule with that. We had to do some technology implementation to be able to run the program as well, but we're on schedule for all of that to go as planned. Yep. Hi.
Perry from Assembly Ways and Means. I just wanted to ask about the supportive housing units. You had said that as part of the 5-year housing plan, you're hoping to add 100,000 affordable housing units to the supply, and out of that you wanted about roughly 10,000 of those to be supportive housing. And so I just wanted to know thus far about how many have been constructed. I think you'd said it was 70,000 overall, and I just wanted to know how many of those were supportive housing.
I could get back to you with our exact number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but we basically target to do like an even amount each year so that we can get to the overall total. So I'm happy to follow up with that. We are fortunate that both at the O agencies that we work with and the eSHI program, which is really an incredible program for those of you that don't talk to other states. It is like the envy of other states who say, it's very hard to get long-term rent and supportive services dollars to make supportive housing work. And so we're very fortunate in the state of New York to have that. And then with that comes, I think, an incredible network of providers that are in sort of every corner of the state who are serving homeless families and IDD families and OMH families. So I'm happy to follow up with our number, but we are generally on track to meet that goal.
Sure, thanks. Glad to hear that. And then as far as the Housing Acceleration Fund, I assume that's the amalgamation of the mixed income revolving loan funds that were in the budget. And I just wanted to know if you had any projections for about how many units could be financed annually with that investment.
Yeah, so we're hoping that it finances about 1,800 units of housing. It depends on what, sort of projects come in and the cost of those and the sort of gap in the financing stack for the projects. But that's sort of our rough target as we go into next year and spend and get all the money out the door.
Okay. That was all the questions that I had. Thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Does Jesse, Matt, any other? Seeing that as there are none, Commissioner, thank you so much for making yourself available today, for answering our questions, and for your partnership throughout the year. We look forward to working with you in crafting next year's budget, and then negotiating it and making those late night calls for your guidance as well. So
Great.
Thank you very much, and to all who attended. Everybody have a nice day.
Thanks for having me.